Chapter 4 Unclenching the Fist. I met her at the bus stop next to Sneha Children's Home every Sunday after class. Ajay's mother was a tiny woman, barely taller than her 12-year-old son. She visited him every Sunday at Sneha Children's Home, and since both of us lived in the same area, we fell into a routine of sharing the bus journey back home. This worked out well for me since I could not read the bus numbers or route details, both of which were in Malayalam. She was always accompanied by Ajay's young sister, 8-year-old Anju, who did little other than weep silently from the minute we stepped out of Sneha Children's Home. It was obviously a very special occasion, and they always dressed carefully in their Sunday best, with glass bangles to match and fresh flowers in their hair. She knew me as Ajay's teacher, and to me, she was Ajay's mother. We even had a weekly routine to reinforce this relationship. Ajay is studying well? She would ask. Yes, I would reply in my rudimentary Malayalam. He is very clever. She would nod and have a go at English. He is good boy? I would nod back and smile. Yes, he is a good boy. She would sometimes smile at my children and patted their heads. The bus ride would pass in comfortable silence, with the two of us exchanging smiles whenever our eyes met. Anju would always sit on her mother's lap, shedding silent tears. Occasionally, Ajay's mother would pat her daughter's hand or point to something outside the window, but mostly she seemed lost in her own thoughts. Once she shrugged and stated the obvious, sad, Ajay not in home. But otherwise, she was pretty stoic about the whole situation. Ajay was a bright, active boy given to bouts of uncontrollable fury. It was often little things that set him off, and once aroused, he raved and hit out, unmindful of the consequences. Provoking him was one of my favorite ploys of the rest of the children in my class, when they were bored and wanted a diversion. It was easy as pie and just as entertaining. An insult hurled in his direction or a paper ball bounced off his head was enough to set off an explosion. Ajay would hurl himself across tables and chairs to get at the culprit, leaving a trail of upturned furniture in his wake. The students and I usually managed to restrain him physically, but sometimes he did manage to grab his target. In either case, nothing good ever came of it for Ajay, since news of the classroom chaos inevitably reached the administrators of Sneha Children's Home, resulting in some sort of punishment: no TV, no football, extra homework. Ajay was at his happiest on Sundays, after meeting his mother and sister. He was all smiles and sunshine, a spring in his step and a song on his lips. If he caught me watching, he would crinkle his eyes at me, making my heart take a little leap of its own. It was a comic, crazy, contagious happiness, and his cheerful smile was the last thing I saw on Sundays as I walked out of the gates of Sneha Children's Home with his mother and weeping sister. The visual was right out of an Eastern philosophy manual. Tears and laughter all at one go. But since I was no philosopher, I merely found it very disorienting. It made me happy and unhappy by turns, and most days I was not sure which. The best thing that ever happened to Ajay that year was breaking his wrist during a football match. His mother took him home and he returned as a new improved version after a month. Every line on his face had vanished and he glowed with good health and happiness. For weeks thereafter, he stayed out of trouble and stayed on course. He no longer gave the sense of a tightly strung bow, battle ready at all times. He had lost his tautness, relaxing enough to drop some of his defenses. But it was a temporary reprieve. The anger came creeping back over time, and so did the aggression and the fisticuffs. Ajay's redemption lay within the circle of his family, but he could not go home. His exile was set in motion a year ago when his father abandoned the family, leaving his mother destitute with two children to take care of, to care for. There was no help forthcoming from the extended family either. Nevertheless, she managed to hold her head above the rising waters for a while and hold the family together. But eventually, things fell apart and the family disintegrated. She goes out in the evenings meeting men. Sometimes she stays out all night. It is not a good environment for children. At home, Ajay creates problems for his mother and his sister. Sometimes he even hits them. So, Ajay is here and his sister stays with a relative near the house. This was the obfuscating explanation I received at Sneha Children's Home. Piecing together the story of the family is not difficult. A young mother, abandoned by her husband, taking up prostitution. The children losing first their father, then their home and mother and each other. The son externalizing his helpless anger at the changed circumstances and lashing out at everyone, including his beloved family. The daughter internalizing the pain and clutching it close to her heart. Often sketched on the silver screen as a family saga of long drawn out human suffering. This was a story worth at least a couple of sad songs, and a dozen heart-rending dialogues and somber visuals. But shorn of the filmy glamour, Ajay's story had an air of almost mundane wretchedness about it. It bore all the hallmarks of commonplace misery that allowed the observer to walk on by without a pause. And yet, if one paused for a moment, it was a tragedy of epic proportions. Despite the predict despite the predict despite the predictability of the narrative, the commonplace nature of a disaster does nothing to ease the pain of those afflicted. The cycle of pain is neither shortened nor is the intensity diminished by repeated battering. The heartbreak of abandonment, the humiliation of destitution, the terror of losing parents, the anguish of institutionalization, the loneliness of a broken family, heartbreaking, mind-numbing agonies that accompany tedious routine tragedies. Ajay was in Sneha Children's Home for 2 years. He was a bright student, but he continued to be tormented by anger and never quit settle down there. Then, out of the blue came the news that his mother was getting married again. That Sunday was the last time I saw her and Anju. Ajay skimmed over the marriage bed and simply told me that he was going back home. The staff at Sneha Children's Home confirmed this news, although there was some skepticism and raised eyebrows about the marriage. On the way home that Sunday, Ajay's mother confirmed that she was taking him home. She said nothing about the upcoming wedding either. A week later, Ajay was gone and he never returned to Sneha Children's Home again. He continued to go to the same school though, and so I heard of him a couple of times from the other children at Sneha Children's Home. He continued to perform well at school, and that was about all the news I had of him after he left Sneha Children's Home. The math classes went on, and other children filled the gap left by Ajay in my classroom. But the void left by his mother remained. She was not someone I could forget easily. I will always remember the first time I met Ajay's mother. It was the month of August when the Kerala monsoon was at its vicious best. We shivered as we stood at the bus stop, holding up umbrellas which were useless against the deluge. Their finery was soggy and dripping. The flowers wilted. But no season or reason could ever make them dress down for their visit to Sneha Children's Home. On the bus, I was thoroughly scolded by the conductor for not tendering the exact ticket fare, but no amount of scrambling through my bag and my pockets would yield the 50 paise I needed. Ajay's mother quickly rummaged in her bag and pulled out the requisite coin. I smiled at her in relief and thanked her profusely. The Sunday afternoon, as soon as we got onto the bus and settled down, she pressed a coin into my hand. Change is difficult to get, no? So I brought for you. I opened my fist and looked at the coin and then kept looking at it, not knowing what to say. There was nothing to say. Of all the beauty in the world, there is none quite as lovely as exceptional generosity. The blows dealt by circumstances had not knocked the humanness out of her. Despite her life's tragedies, she still retained the graciousness to empathize with my little discomforts. In the chaos that her life was, she yet managed to pry out a sliver of space for me. As the bus moved along, my heart soared out and swept across the crimson sky. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The smell of talcum powder, coconut oil, and jasmine filled me up. There is life full of little moments, and there are moments worth a lifetime. This was a moment I would return to again and again all my life whenever I needed a little pickup. I felt privileged and humbled and exhilarated, but most of all, I felt very, very lucky. Ajay's mother did not hold my life in balance with hers. She did not see me as a person whose life was easier than hers. She looked beyond the privileges I had. She cut through all the layers of differences and reached out to me as a person in need of help. Help that she was in a position to provide, and so she did. I can't help but contrast this with my reaction when I come across celebrity interviews. The slightest hint of complaint, and my impulse is to say, "Screw you, privileged dumpers." Obviously, I do not know the lives of the rich and the famous, and therefore cannot feel their pain. But it is also true that I lack the generosity of spirit to empathize with people who led more entitled lives than mine. Unlike Ajay's mother, I am not always able to cut through the trappings and connect to the person within. She took charge of me all that year and next. Each Sunday, she had a smile and the change ready for me. When Ajay left, I missed her presence as much as I missed having Ajay in my class. I missed serene endings to my weekends with the tiny woman who showed me what grace under pressure really meant. But that was hardly the end of the kindnesses I encountered at Sneha Children's Home. I have a bag full of little trinkets, a reminder of the fundamentals of giving. If you truly have it in your heart to give, you will find a worthy gift. Everyone in this world has an eternal void in their life, one that can only be closed with special heartfelt gifts. A bright metallic keychain was a gift from Vijay, a teen runaway from Chennai. He was tall and thin with the yellowest teeth I have ever seen, and he flashed them all the time. He spoke only Tamil, and since that made verbal communication difficult at Sneha Children's Home, he smiled his way through everything. He had a keychain that he carried around like a talisman. When he wasn't polishing it or bouncing the sunlight off the shiny surface, it was in his pocket, with one hand constantly brushing against it for reassurance. A few months later, the legal formalities were completed and he was taken back home. He shook hands with me, said goodbye, and handed me the keychain. Just like that. Casually, offhandedly. He unclenched his fist, placed it in my palm, and walked away. I was staggered at the ease with which he had given away his most prized belonging. So many people here that he could have given to, I thought. How lucky I am. How selfish I am to think that, I realized immediately. It was ironic. Vijay's magnanimity and my pretty response. But I was all aglow with joy and quite unable to feel any signs of remorse. Over the years, my memory of Vijay has dimmed somewhat, and I often find it hard to conjure up with his face. What remains hardwired in my mind is a visual of his unclenching fist and those dazzling yellow teeth. Saju is another unforgettable from Sneha Children's Home. Everyone knows Saju to be the best artist at Sneha Children's Home. His books never have empty pages. He sketches, illustrates, and colors his way through every blank sheet. Even the pages with classwork are etched with little designs and doodles. When he learned the art of drawing pencil portraits, he immediately drew one for me. Very, very beautiful, I told him truthfully. He looked from the drawing to me and then back again. A little different, no? He said hesitantly, and I had to agree. The large almond eyes, the lush billowing hair, the delicate heart-shaped face, Helen of Troy would have been lucky to look like that. The drawing lay tucked away into my bag for years, till it crumbled along the folds into dust. It still lies there, in the form of a white powder coating the insides of my bag, occasionally appearing on my fingertips when I dig deep for lost things. Saju was brought into Sneha Children's Home as a very young street child, and his family had never been traced. But he had been taken on as a foster child by a local family, and he spent his holidays with them. One New Year, when he returned from spending Christmas with them, he handed me a little box of kajal, eyeliner. My eyes were sensitive to eye makeup. I never used it. Not that I expected him to have noticed. Not the first time I have received a thoughtless gift, I said to myself. She always wears kajal, Saju said, pointing to a young, mad volunteer across the room. It looks very nice. You also wear. On the contrary, he had noticed and carefully picked the gift to fill a void in my beauty resume. I was touched at the thought of Saju trying to give me a makeover. But it was also really funny and I laughed out loud. Was he trying to figure a way to turn me into the Helen of Troy portrait? The picture of him gallantly attempting the impossible made me laugh even more. Saju looked puzzled, but he laughed along gamely. I still hold on to that box of kajal, now long past its expiry date. While it has never been of much help in improving my looks, it has certainly added much beauty to my life. These experiences made me do a rethink about more and less. When I examined my own pattern of giving, I realized how reluctant my generosity was. I carefully calculated what I needed and wanted. Then I factored in what I thought I needed and what I thought I wanted. If anything was still left, that was what I gave away. This was true of both time and money. Giving did not play a central role in my life. It lay somewhere along the fringes. In fact, giving was more about me than the recipient. Clearly, I had too much and was giving away too little, saying yes to the wrong things and saying no too often. If I said yes when I couldn't afford to, what would happen? I wanted to know. So, each time I had to contribute to a cause. I calculated what I could afford and gave away double that amount. When I needed to give my time, I said yes without pondering on the consequences. And what were the consequences? Actually, there were none. But then the answer was always obvious, wasn't it? Had I ever heard of someone being impoverished by giving away too much? Or of a generosity that depleted the quality of someone's life? And when something really needs to be done, don't we always manage to find time to do it? I had my answer. I knew what I had to do. But putting it into practice was not easy at all. Reversing a lifetime of habit was tough. It was hard to fight the instinct to say no, grit my teeth and say yes and then follow through. The prequel to Unclenching the Fist is Opening the Heart, and I'm still in the process of prying it loose. My only hope at the moment is that practice will speed up the process till generosity becomes a reflex. Less about giving and more about holding back nothing. Not a carefully calculated, weighed, calibrated act, but an unthinking response. This was a big lesson, but only the first of the lessons I was to learn in the coming years. The next biggie was not so much gradual enlightenment as it was a fist in the gut. An encounter with a street child called Munna that would not just impact me but also cause Matt to reevaluate many of its fundamentals.